Well, thank you very much. I accept your nomination. Well, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. Tonight we bring you what has the makings of becoming a quadrennial program here at the Truman Forum. How many of you were here in 2008 to see something pretty much like this? Yes, a public conversation about the presidential election with political commentator Eleanor Clift, conducted by everyone's favorite library director, Crosby Kemper III. So, over the past few decades, Eleanor Clift has become one of the most significant observers of the American political scene, well known by millions of readers and television viewers. Indeed, Eleanor Clift is so well known that she really needs no introduction. So, she's not going to get one. Crosby Kemper, in his own way, is also well known for many things, among them, shall we say, his strongly held political views. A few of which might be somewhat at variance with those of Eleanor Clift.
Christopher Hitchens.
Just guessing, So I suspect we're going to have a lively and invigorating evening of political discourse. Before we begin, a few basic guidelines. First, Crosby and Eleanor will engage in their public conversation until about 7:25. From 7:25 until 7:45, Eleanor will take questions from the audience. As usual, there'll be microphones up here at the bottom of each of these two aisles. Because we want as many people as possible to get a chance to ask their questions in that tight 20-minute time frame, I request that you actually ask a question. I request that you try real hard to frame that question in 3 or 4 sentences. I really request that you resist the temptation to make a political statement or tell us some history that we don't already know. Also, we are taping this program for posterity. It will be in our archives at the Missouri Valley Special Collections. So we want to hear every single word uttered by our guest and her interlocutor. So please, if you have not already done so, time to put those cell phones on silent mode. Okay, time for the conversation to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eleanor Clift and Crosby Kemper.
It took me 4 years to get over the savage beating I got last time.
And I see 3 bottles here, so I'm getting my share quick before.
Yeah. Don't know what we spiked them with this time. I decided, because I was desperately trying to keep up last time, and also because of the wisdom I've gained in the ensuing years, that I would treat this not as a political debate about the election, though I suspect that Eleanor Clift and I will vote for different people, and I will vote more often than she does. But I want to take. She has written a book called "Selecting a President: Fundamentals of American Government," which is kind of a primer about elections. So I thought that I would use this book as a way of describing this election in terms of our electoral process, in terms of the way our government works. I put the word "works" in quotes.
Right.
And so, to begin that, it's called "Selecting a President." It's a wonderful book. I have read it cover to cover a couple of times now. And at the very, very beginning, Eleanor, if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You say, which I think is an interesting observation, because everyone, both Mitt Romney and President Obama, are saying this is a critical election, this is a transformative election. Now, I'm old enough, at the age of 61, to have heard that now for about 20 election cycles. Actually, well, a little bit less than that, but the math didn't pass math, in 8th grade. you say, and I quote you, they are always of critical importance. And you seem to genuinely believe that each election is of critical importance. I will not trap you by asking you about the Harding versus Cox election.
All right, thank you.
Or Coolidge versus Davis. But maybe you could define for us what is critical about this election.
Well, what is critical about this election, America elected the first African-American president 4 years ago, and I think I've heard Vernon Jordan talk about this. Vernon Jordan being civil rights leader, friend of Bill Clinton, Wall Street power broker. He's had worn a lot of different hats. He said in America, affirmation is important, but reaffirmation is even more important. So I think for a variety of reasons, given this country's history, that re-electing the first black president is important. Then you talk about issues. I think the two candidates, Governor Romney, President Obama, have laid out very different visions about how government should work, the role of government, how the economy can be healed, and even their visions are probably about foreign policy are more similar than different. So I think I would make the critical part of the election about really the economy and government. And also because the control of the House and the Senate, I think, are both at stake, particularly the Senate. And what happens over the next 4 years will vary quite dramatically if we have an all-Republican government, which would happen if Mitt Romney does win, or if we continue to have divided government, which is probably more likely than not if President Obama wins. And so I think that all adds up to critical election.
Of course, Missouri's been doing its bit for divided government with Todd Aiken's campaign. But it seems to me that the election comes down to which one of the witch doctors that we want to elect. There's the witch doctor we've got who says that government can create jobs, and the CBO came out with their numbers and said we created between 1.2 million and 3.8 million jobs, which from a scientific point of view, a 250% or 300% differential doesn't strike me as very real. And then Mitt Romney, who and the supply side Republican caucus, the anti-tax Republican caucus, who thinks that we can cut taxes until enough business starts to pay enough taxes to make up our trillions and trillions of dollars of deficits. It seems to me on both sides, the evidence is that this is magic and not reality.
Well, first I'm going to say something in defense of the candidates. We are going to have a debate on October 3rd, which is going to be about domestic issues, principally the economy. And I spoke at a college recently, College of the Ozarks in 100 miles from Little Rock, Arkansas, and a young man got up and he said, I don't think either of these candidates are worth anything. I'm so disappointed in the president, and I think Mitt Romney is an eggplant. So I said immediately, he's not an eggplant. Now that was easy to defend. But
eggplant is good for you. Eggplant is good for you.
I said, watch the debate. I said, these are two smart, thoughtful people, and I think that will come across in the debate. So that's my first response. Second, witch doctor theory. This president has created more jobs in his tenure in office than were created the whole first decade. The first decade under George W. Bush, principally, was a lost decade. Secondly, economists across the ideological spectrum expect the economy to recover, not as fast as we would like, and that 12 million jobs is the likely number of jobs that will be created over the next 4 years. Mitt Romney is going around saying that's what he will create, which is fine. That's what Obama would create too. And I think the witch doctor aspect, that the president has put more meat on his bones as to what policies he's going to pursue, because they're essentially the policies he's put in place. And I think one of the reasons Governor Romney is losing ground in this race is because he hasn't been specific. And it's not just Democrats saying that. Bill Kristol, the editor of the Weekly Standard, is apoplectic that Romney is throwing away a chance to win
Right.
the White House by refusing to be
Yeah.
honest and forthcoming about
I-
what he would
I'm
do.
not, I'm not sure he's being dishonest, but you're right, he's not being specific. I mean, he's able to be
Sin
specific
of
about.
omission.
Yeah, his wife's 2 Cadillacs. We know how many Cadillacs she has, but yeah, we don't know
Drives
the
a couple
details.
Cadillacs.
I read the 57-point plan that he put out, and I stopped at about 14 because they all sounded pretty much alike.
Right.
But I would say, I think the job numbers you give, it's the market that's actually created the relatively minimal number of jobs, minimal compared to any other recovery, compared to the Reagan recovery, for instance, in 83, 84. The government jobs that were created were actually shedding, which was predictable. The teacher jobs and the state jobs that came from the block grants and whatnot, and that none of the creation of jobs happened immediately from the stimulus. It's all the market jobs have been created later after the stimulus is over.
Well, we could have a whole other debate about
Right.
how much a president can really influence here, but
And I agree with
I
that.
think we probably ought to
Okay.
spare the audience
So
that
now
one.
I want to get to your book and to the one mistake that you make in this book.
Okay.
The one mistake.
Given the status of the publishing industry and the lack of the army of fact checkers that
fact-checking,
used to once
fact-checking
exist, if you only found one mistake,
Yeah, well,
that's
and I
good.
did. I only found one mistake. Some opinions I disagree with, but only one mistake.
Okay.
And that actually you can't be blamed for because it's about Missouri, and we have, after all,
Oh, and you have particular knowledge.
a dark,
Yes.
yes, and we have a very dark kind of political culture here.
Okay.
You say in the book that there are, you get into the subject of primaries and caucuses and whatnot. It's a very enlightening chapter. You say there are 14 states that have caucuses, and you list them. And you probably thought this because Missouri does have a primary, but we are unique because we also have a caucus.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a caucus, and we spent $7 million actually. So we love democracy so much that we had both.
Well, Texas also has both, because I remember Bill Clinton used to say Texas is the only state where you can vote twice. But so Missouri, you can also vote twice.
Missouri, you can vote twice, and not only that, we love it so much that our caucus is still going on.
Okay.
Yeah, actually,
Have you come up with any more candidates?
Actually, we did. Believe it or not. In Missouri, in the caucus, Rick Santorum won the primary.
Okay.
And Ron Paul, I think, came in second. But in the caucuses, I have here, they do it by counties. The county, they vote in counties. We vote in counties
Okay.
to send people to the state convention. And Rick Santorum won 14.5 counties. There are 114 counties in Missouri and St. Louis, which is both a county and a city, to confuse you
So you
even
could
more.
win half a county?
Yes, you can, because Rick Santorum won 14.5, Ron Paul 10.5, Mitt Romney 2.5, Newt Gingrich 1.5. You'll notice we're not very far to 114 yet. Uncommitted, 14. I get this from Wikipedia today.
I'm glad
Unknown,
somebody's keeping track. That's-
unknown, 72. But then you were down at the College of the Ozarks, so you can probably understand why we have this love for democracy
Exactly.
in the great state of Missouri. Anyway, the question I want to ask you about caucuses is about the Iowa caucuses. You talk about the Iowa caucuses, and you have a great sentence which does my heart good actually about them. In the dead of winter, Iowans gather in local schools, libraries, and churches. Now, I want to know, that Mike Huckabee's folks, you talk about him winning, obviously gathered in the churches. Was it the libraries or the schools that John Edwards' folks gathered in?
Ouch.
And the real question I've got about this, which you mention in passing, but I'd love for you to talk about it a little bit more, is this question of the way we pick candidates. Iowa and New Hampshire, the caucus state and the first caucus state, the first primary state, are enormously important in American politics, way outside their size. And there's been constant criticism of the demographics of Iowa and New Hampshire, which are primarily white, more
Well,
rural, et cetera, et cetera. What's your feeling about that?
Well, the anomaly continues into the general election, because here we are. If you live in California, New York, or Texas, you're not going to see either of these candidates, because we all know how those states are going to vote. Iowa has 6 electoral votes, and both candidates are all over the cornfields there, because that's a battleground state. And so does the small population in Iowa, deserve this much attention? But it's a validating process. Jimmy Carter, again, that was the first campaign I covered, and he realized after the George McGovern loss in 1972 that McGovern had kind of gotten his name on the map by going into Iowa. And of course, McGovern had helped write the new rules for the Democratic primaries, and he knew how to work those rules and managed to get the nomination. So then Carter goes to Iowa, sleeps in people's living rooms, gets himself well-known, makes a splash, gets the nomination, and Iowa ever since then has been a must place for people to go. And it was especially validating for Barack Obama because it was a white state.
Right.
And he won overwhelmingly. And until that moment, African Americans were for Hillary Clinton. They didn't think that Obama could win in a white country, basically. Right. And it showed it could be done. But there were also, I covered that campaign in 2008, and one of the mistakes that the Clinton people made was they were giving out all sorts of inducements to get people to the polls. They gave out snow shovels. Everybody in Iowa already has a snow shovel. And they spent a lot of money on those snow shovels. Maybe it's a collector's item. You can go on eBay.
Lawn decorations now.
Right.
Lawn decorations. Well, and which gets to the question. You talk a little bit about this, but I'd love to talk a little bit more about this in the book, which is the groups, the parties, the political parties, and what groups they represent. And we know Madison said that self-interest in the 10th Federalist is important, and it's important to have a large country because if you have so many factions, they can play off each other. Both parties seem to me to have been captured by relatively small groups of people. Republicans have been captured to some extent on social issues by Christian evangelicals with a very, very specific agenda. And by people who believe that taxes ought to always be cut, and that's how we'll solve the deficit, which again, as a banker, former banker, I don't quite understand that.
Right.
Democrats seem to me to have been captured by some identity groups, African American and Hispanic identity groups, and by unions who are never talked about until very recently. What's your view of that?
Well, if you're going to be captured, I think it's better to be captured by groups like women. There's the gender gap, which bolsters the Democratic Party. Hispanics, which are now the fastest growing part of the population. I think people have always identified unions with the Democratic Party and corporations and business with Republicans. So I don't think that's especially new. And I think in this cycle, union money is much smaller than what the super PACs funded by business interests are kicking into the race.
You probably saw the Wall Street Journal article a few weeks ago in which they, by going into the Bureau of Labor Statistics and some reports that have not been seen because they're not formally election reports, they revealed that the largest contributors to political causes over the last 20 years are unions, which aggregate to $4.4 billion in contributions to political causes, vastly more than any corporate.
I don't have the statistics at my hand, but I think if this election continues on the trajectory it seems, President Obama could have a very big win here. And you're going to see a lot of unhappiness on the Republican side, and you're going to see the business community, which has spent millions, maybe not billions, but millions to try to defeat Obama, are now going to look and say, we don't want our credit downgraded. We want the country to grow. We're sick of the obstruction. And I think the president is right when he says if he's reelected that the fever will break. And I think there's going to be a lot of recriminations within the Republican Party about what went wrong. Was Mitt Romney not conservative enough? Should the party be rethinking where it's going? And the money that is now being spent is being diverted away from the Romney campaign and more toward the House and Senate races, where money can have an impact.
I think you're probably right about that, and I'd say the notion that they're geniuses, it's sort of like the magic theory of politics, that Karl Rove is a genius. I find pretty silly. I think, and they've already said this, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, the Crossroads, the American Crossroads,
right.
his PAC and whatnot, and have had no noticeable influence. However, I would say, I think the numbers belie what you're saying a little bit, and I make 2 points. One is the gender gap works 2 ways. The Democrats do much better with women, but the Republicans do much better with men.
I agree, but the Democrats do like double digits better with women, and I believe Obama has an 8-point deficit with men. And I would also point out that no Democrat has won the white vote since Lyndon Johnson. And Obama's election in 2008 was not a fluke. It's the demographics of this country are changing in a very big way, which is why the Electoral College. I remember when Bill Clinton won in 1992, James Carville said, we didn't break the electoral lock because the Republicans basically had the solid South. They seemed to have a lock on the Electoral College. And Carville said, we just picked it. Well, now we're looking at an electoral map where the Democrat has an advantage. And I thought to myself, what has changed? And one of the answers is demographics. It's a very different population today.
I agree with you up to a point. And I think Republicans are ridiculously stupid on the immigration issue and have hurt themselves badly. And I think Romney shows that. He's desperately, he does his Univision. Sorry, I think that was a French pronunciation of it.
Right, I like that dropped in there. That was good.
Sorry, it gives you my background, but his interview, he's desperately trying to claw back. However, I will say 2 things about this. One, you know what the fastest growing immigrant group is in the United States? It's Asians.
Asians, yeah.
And Republicans do pretty well with Asians. So I'm not sure that the demographic game is over. And Republicans have historically done okay with Hispanics, particularly when they haven't been fighting the immigration issue. George W. and Jeb, Bush, the Bush family understands this, et cetera. But the second thing I'd say is, I think there's a lot of misreading of the electoral question out there. And let's talk about 47%. No, not that 47%. But the two latest national polls, the Rasmussen and the Gallup poll, show the candidates dead even at 47,
but
47,
that's where we
46,
get into
46.
The way we decide elections here. We don't have a national referendum. It's those battleground states.
Right.
And I think there are like 12 battleground states, and I think the president is leading in 8. And today, one of the polls said he's up 5 in Ohio.
Right.
No Republican in the modern age has won the presidency
Right.
without Ohio.
Right.
So it's the Electoral College where Romney does have the steeper climb.
So Bush
I can
really
throw
did
out
win the
I can
2000
throw out
election,
some numbers here. 237 is the number where Democratic leaning and safe states. So Obama needs just 33 more. The latest Real Clear Politics gives Romney 191 electoral votes, which means he's 79
Right.
votes short.
Right.
So he's got to win a lot more of those battleground states. Right now, the trends don't look good, but I know his campaign is counting a lot on the debates, and in the velocity of the media life that we live in, I suppose anything is possible. But then you wonder, what is the whole last year of campaigning about if Mitt Romney is suddenly trying to reset his campaign and introduce himself at the end of September? It's bizarre.
You talk in your book about every national campaign has a national headquarters. It's usually in Washington, D.C.
Oh.
I think the problem with the Romney campaign is it doesn't actually have a national campaign or national headquarters.
Oh, well, no,
or
well,
national-
they're in Boston, which is one of the
No,
states he claims.
I'm just kidding.
You're just kidding,
It's
okay.
been a, and I think you've seen this, Bill Kristol, you mentioned, and many other conservatives have talked about how bad the campaign is. And
Oh, I know, and they've been saying it publicly, and I must say, I really felt Ann Romney was being interviewed on the radio, and she was asked about this, and she said, enough. They should get in the arena. This is hard.
Right. But I would also, I want to make the point, and this I take from your book. You reminded us all in your book that up to the day of the election in 2004, the polls were showing a 3 to 4% lead for John Kerry. And the exit polls, all the networks had identified John Kerry as the President of the United States. I can't remember which campaign. Oh, Bob Shrum, I think it was. You quote.
Bob Shrum was working with John Kerry on his acceptance speech.
Right, and was calling him Mr. President.
Right, yes. When word came in from Ohio that the numbers were not what they thought, and it turned out if there 100,000 more Democratic votes in Ohio would have changed the outcome of the election.
And
So,
we're all
right.
from Missouri, and we know that 100,000 votes can change like that late at night.
Right,
And,
okay. Yes, we got to get those official voter IDs for everybody.
Absolutely. Do you buy into this notion that there's a suppression of the
I do.
vote
Yeah, I do.
going on?
You didn't have to even ask me that, you know that. Actually, wasn't it one of the legislators in Pennsylvania who basically said after they passed the law, now we can carry the state for Romney? He actually said that out loud.
Right.
So
Isn't it a little
that's not
patronizing to
smart.
Democratic voters to think that getting a government ID, which you need for all kinds of things, to get a library card, to get, to show your address and a picture ID, that's that difficult? Isn't that kind of,
It is difficult.
isn't that a
It is
triumph of low
difficult.
expectations?
No, it is difficult for the elderly, for minorities, for students, especially in some states where you have to travel a good ways to get this. You have to pay money for it. You have to find your birth certificate. I know you probably know where all those documents are, but trust me, not everybody does. And not everybody takes a plane routinely, and not everybody drives a car. So the places where these laws have been put in place have one thing in common. They all have Republican governors and Republican legislatures. So it seems to me that what my mother might have called funny business is going on.
I have to politely disagree with you about this. It seems to me a pretty minimal qualification for voting. And when I lived in St. Louis, I lived in St. Louis for 7 years in a very Democratic ward in the Central West End. And every time I went to vote, there was someone coming in to vote who had already voted, found out that they were listed as already voting. I think voter fraud in this country is a little larger than.
Well, all the people who've studied this have not found evidence of voter fraud. It's minuscule.
They haven't spent enough time in
They
Missouri.
haven't spent enough time. All right. Well, I think we should divert resources from, say, fighting terrorism to, finding voter fraud.
Okay, well,
Fine,
we
go
can agree,
after
we
the
can
real
agree, we can agree
problems.
on that. Let's spend more time on
Okay.
terrorism than on this. Talk for a minute. This is an interesting part of the book. You talk about who gets to be president, where they come from. It's been mostly governors lately. President Obama, of course, was a senator and a community organizer. Unique in that. I don't think there are any other community organizers.
But there was another senator. His name was John F.
John
Kennedy.
F. Kennedy. There are a couple,
Not
yeah.
bad company
There are
to
a
be in.
Yeah, but mostly governors. Only one House member directly elected
Right.
from the House, James Garfield.
Right.
It seems that these things go in waves. They're governors for a while, they're senators for a while. The vice presidents succeed. But why don't presidents come from more places in our country? Why do they have to go through the?
I liked President Clinton's line in the Democratic convention that most candidates like you to think they were born in a log cabin that they built themselves.
Right.
You know? I mean, it was, if you watch both those conventions, it was really interesting. Everybody was up from dirt, you know?
Right.
Well, presidents traditionally come from places where they've shown leadership, governors. They do not come from the business community, although at various times business leaders have been talked about as potential presidents. But they tend, and I actually think that's some of Romney's difficulties. He's a businessman, he's a CEO. He's not used to being challenged. He's not used to having to schmooze and beg people for their vote. It's a different mindset. But I do think, you know, the governors bring executive experience. Senators have been less successful, and in part it's one of the criticisms leveled against President Obama, because if you go to the legislature, you know how to talk, but you don't actually ever do anything. And that has been the charge leveled certainly against Obama. But I don't know where else you would want presidents to come from, because you need a political base to run. You know, if you're, actually, Joe Scarborough, there's a rumor that he's going to run in 2016. You know, he would have built his reputation as a talk show host. Now, Reagan was an actor, but he was also a two-term governor.
Right.
If Scarborough has designs on the presidency, I'd kind of like to see him run for governor first in whatever state he claims. I guess he's from Florida, lives in New York now. But I think it's difficult to break into the president's club if you don't have a political base. And people with political bases tend to be people who've been elected to something.
Actually, I agree with you about that. I think Sam Rayburn said, Lyndon Johnson, when he was vice president, went to Sam Rayburn's office, Speaker of the House, after his first cabinet meeting with all of President Kennedy's Harvard professor advisors and you know, the senior people from Wall Street and whatnot that he appointed to the cabinet, and was telling Sam Rayburn how impressed he was and how he felt, you know, he's maybe out of his depth and whatnot. And Sam Rayburn said, Lyndon, I wish just one of them had been elected dog catcher once.
Right, right. Well, of course, Johnson, if you listen to, I listen on tape to the various Robert Caro books. They're fascinating about, and there's still another one coming. It's fantastic. But Johnson initially dismissed Kennedy as his remark was he hasn't done anything.
No.
Yeah, and didn't even consider him a threat initially. Anyway, Johnson's use of power, of course, is just so masterful. And I looking at Obama, if he is reelected, I think he's learned probably two things. One, that he can't really trust the other side. But two, I think he's learned how to wield power. He's gotten better at that.
Another section of your book that's fascinating because of the differences between what was then and what is now is about platforms, the party platforms at the conventions and whatnot. You have a great short bit about Hubert Humphrey's 1948 speech on civil rights, and which is a very moving address, and which is one of the most important moments, I think, in the history of Americans realizing the deficit we had in civil rights. And you wrote a great column, I think, in the last week or so, or right after the Democratic National Convention, about the platforms, right. and how there really wasn't much going on except these tiny little things. You talked mainly about abortion and the Democratic platform. You could have gone the same way with the Republican platform, right. Or very, very narrow semantic differences, and nobody really fought about it, and there's no real battle cry about it, except, of course, the God in Jerusalem problem that the Democrats have. Talk about that for a second.
The God in Jerusalem problem? Okay.
Oh, you know, there's
well, they
Antonio
took,
Villaraigosa.
In the Democratic platform, they had a phrase, God-given rights, or God-given attributes, and I forget even what context it was in. I think it was kind of dumb to take out God-given, and they just put attributes. And Jerusalem, that was the battle over whether the embassy, the U.S. embassy, should be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That comes up every 4 years, and it's, as the White House explains, it's aspirational. It's not official U.S. policy.
Right.
And so the Democrats took that out. The president, or the White House, intervened and put it back in. But when I did some reporting on that, I went back to 1984 when Walter Mondale was running against Gary Hart, challenged by Gary Hart, and that was the main issue in the New York primary. And they both favored moving the embassy, but Gary Hart had written some letter saying that it should be part of a larger deal and not done separately, and Mondale accused him of flip-flopping. So it's an inane issue. It adds up to nothing. But at conventions, people can spend a lot of time arguing about these things, and it becomes very symbolically important. So those were two areas the Democrats didn't need to wade in. But they ended up having a very successful convention, which really changed the dynamic.
It was a little better than the Republicans,
a little
for
better.
Sure. though I have to say, both conventions seem to be had the appearance of the invisible man. Villaraigosa, when they voted on putting God back in, it's clear that a majority of the people, at least the noise
the eyes have it, right?
And he had to do it 3 times until there were enough he heard invisible voices.
Right.
And then, of course, there was Clint Eastwood and the Invisible Man at the Republican
Well, there were
convention.
other invisible men at the Republican convention, and this is Bill Maher's joke. He said, if you're a party and you've held the White House previously for 8 years, and you don't have George W. Bush or Dick Cheney or Donald Rumsfeld or Colin Powell or Karl Rove, you're not running a political party, you're running a witness protection program.
It should be said, Eleanor Clift wrote a very nice column about George W. going off to fight AIDS and during the convention.
I did.
Doing
I
something real
was
instead of going to
struck
convention.
by a photo that I saw of George W. Bush sort of hammering nails and painting at a clinic in Africa, an AIDS clinic. And so that prompted me to write about his post-presidency and his retirement plans. And I think the lead of the column was that he's doing a lot of things that his critics would applaud. That's one of them.
Another section of the book is about the really important job of picking that really important person in American politics, the vice president, and how this affects things. And you talk a little bit about it used to be geographical balance and things like that, and now we're just looking for somebody who doesn't spell potato wrong. I want to know what your opinion is of Mitt Romney picking Paul Ryan, but I also want to know. Well, let's start with that. The Paul Ryan question.
In fairness, Dan Quayle, which is the potato reference, George H.W. Bush picked him because he was trying to reach the baby boomers.
Yeah, the demographic.
And that's right. And so there was actually see behind that pick, if not in the pick. Anyway, Paul Ryan. I see that the selection of Paul Ryan as more a matter of desperation on Romney's side, that he still didn't have the conservative wing of the party solidified, and Ryan is their man. He also saw it as a generational leap, that this is the future of the party. But then after naming him and getting conservatives all worked up at the prospect that we were going to have a serious debate about the role of government and reforming entitlements, then Romney quickly skittered away any serious debate and basically I think Ryan has not had a whole lot to say. And I spoke this afternoon with a political scientist named Sam Popkin, who I think was here just recently.
Right.
And he said, can you find me a single Republican running statewide in a purple state or a battleground state who is supporting the Ryan budget and the Ryan budget cuts? And the answer is no.
Right. But isn't it too bad that we're not having that debate? I thought it was a great choice because I thought whatever side of the issue you're on, that we'd have the serious debate that we've really been avoiding about what we're going to do long term with the budget, and we're not having that debate.
At the University of Chicago, they've had a T-shirt that says in the front, "It works in practice," and in the back it says, "But does it work in theory?" Now, I think it's very nice to have a debate about entitlement reform, but there aren't any politicians left to tell the story because you alienate too many people. That's the kind of deal you make after you're in office, and that's what President Obama, if he's reelected, is going to have to face up to.
Right, and I think you're probably right about that. I mean, have you read Bob Woodward's book, The Price of Politics?
I haven't read it, but I've read so much about it that I feel
yeah.
like I've read it. You know, that's kind of the
yeah.
Washington way.
And he makes that point, is that you have to make the deal, and you have to make it behind closed doors, and that there are a few people who are doing that, and you know, though he blames Obama primarily for his inability to do this, for his recurrence to a sort of public persona, public statement that Boehner was ready to make a deal, Ryan was ready to make a deal, even Eric Cantor, who at the end he heaps some blame on, was ready to make a deal at the beginning, but they kept making things public, and it kept getting back to both caucuses, the Democrats and the Republicans, to Nancy Pelosi on one side and to the Tea Party folks on the Republican side, and they kept deep sixing it. But he blames Obama primarily for that, for not being able to do a deal.
I don't know that he blames Obama primarily, but there's enough blame to go around. I'm not sure that Obama.
Pretty even-handed
I don't
about
think Boehner could have gotten the votes for that.
He says he compares the president to Reagan and Clinton, and said, had it been Reagan or Clinton, they would have made sure that a deal was done. That Clinton was able to do a deal with Gingrich, Reagan was able to do a deal with O'Neill.
Clinton was able to do a deal with Gingrich because Gingrich decided that it was in his interest to work with Bill Clinton and to throw, this is probably more detail than anybody here wants to know, but to throw Bob Dole under the bus by getting Clinton to sign welfare reform. He delivered the election to Clinton and ended Dole's chances, and Dole knew that, and then a year later they were impeaching Clinton. So I don't know that this president could have done anything any differently, given his personality, given the dynamics of the political parties. But I do believe if he's reelected, the wolf is at the door, and they're gonna have to make these decisions. If he wins decisively, he'll have some pretty high cards, but he has some high cards already because the Bush tax cuts expire at the end of the year, and if he does nothing, it solves a lot of
well, but if he does
problems.
nothing, there is a huge tax increase and big spending cuts, and we've got probably what we had in 1937,
Right.
which is a double dip, big
Right,
recession.
and the Republicans don't want that either, so
Right, so
presumably the pain
Maybe it's a gun
of-
to the head.
Yeah, well, presumably, I mean, there should be reason enough for the parties to act, so.
Right. Well, that's a positive idea. I like.
Right, yeah. That's
I
about
like
as
that.
optimistic as I'll get.
Okay, let's talk about the other 47% for a second. And this is not something related to your book, but how bad a mark against Mitt is this remark about the 47%? Does it move any votes? Does it move any independent voters? I mean, the other two 47%, the 47% that Rasmussen and Gallup say are on either side right now, and which really is, we've really been a 50-50 country for a long time now. Is it going to move any votes?
I think it's devastating for him politically. And, you know, I do the McLaughlin group, which leans to the right, and everybody said this was devastating because one of the key questions in any poll when you respond about a candidate is he or she on my side. Romney was having trouble with that already. The bottom has fallen out on that number now. And the latest polling I saw today really has Obama doing much better with independents. And there aren't that many independents actually out there. But
The Rasmussen and Gallup
Yeah.
polls, which are not today, that they're yesterday and the day
Right.
before, show Romney up fairly substantially with the independents, like 8 to 10%.
well, I guess we can all find polls that we satisfy. Right? I'll go get my poll. You show me yours.
Isn't the 47% number, doesn't this go back to George McGovern and his discovery in the 1972 campaign? You know, he played the same cards that President Obama has been playing about taxing the rich, and he had the transfer program that he proposed, that he was going to move $1,000 from the people. This, you have to remember how much this was worth in 1972. He was going to move money from everybody making more than $12,000 to everybody making under $12,000.
Crosby, I love George McGovern, but one thing Barack Obama is not doing is modeling his campaign after
No, I
George
understand.
McGovern.
I understand, but what McGovern said about that after he'd lost the election and got only 37% of the vote is he didn't realize how many people who were making under $12,000 expected to be making more than $12,000. And I wonder if the president hasn't fallen down in understanding the aspirations of people. Their aspirations are to grow, not to...
Yeah, the aspirations are to grow, but we went through a financial meltdown where people who created it came out giving each other bonuses and looking like the game was rigged in their favor. And you look at the tax cuts and how the top percentile has benefited and done well, really at the expense of others. And you have people like Warren Buffett coming out and saying that this is just, it's a matter of fairness, but it's also a matter of revenue. We don't have enough to do everything. If we want to invest in infrastructure and education and health and research, we don't need to be giving more money to the people at the top who either, they're not spending it and they're not creating jobs. If they were doing that, the first decade of this century would not have been a jobless decade. So
just a little bit of what you just said there, but I'm not sure that I make the leap from somebody being paid a lot of money to the problems that we just had in the economy. I would agree with you that I think we should raise some taxes, and obviously we need to raise taxes on the wealthy if we're going to do that, if we're going to close the budget gap. I think that's true, but I think it's wrong to be punitive about people making money.
It's not punitive. I mean, the Occupy Wall Street movement pointed out that, you know, the salaries of CEOs have just gone up astronomically, and we have this wealth gap in this country. The middle class is shrinking, and the top, we're beginning to look like...
Shrinking, but,
well, the middle class is shrinking. There was a report from 53 to 51%. You know, the middle class is losing ground. Salaries and salary gains have not kept up. And one way you adjust for that is in your income tax code, and we can't afford to give these tax cuts to everybody. So, I mean, I think the president is on strong ground, and the polls show people support him, including people who are in those income brackets.
I think our key disagreement, as I said, I myself, and it's not the Republican position, my position, but is that we ought to raise taxes on wealthier folks a little bit. Anyway, I think the real key is to simplify the tax code. And the wealthy are paying more.
Well, that is the Romney position, but he's been very coy about what he would eliminate.
He's a pragmatist, and he worked with the unlike Obama, who was unable to work with the Republicans, Romney was able to work with the Democrats in Massachusetts. But I think the key thing that I disagree with that you said is you said...
And he gave us a very good health care plan in Massachusetts that he's disowned. Right.
He was willing to compromise on that. Again, unlike President Obama, who made some feints towards compromising with the Republican view on health care.
Crosby, come on. He went so far into bipartisan land that it was la-la land. They were never going to do anything. They made a
completely
decision that they
disagree
were
with you
not
about
going to
that.
give him a clean victory.
I completely disagree with you about that.
It's full of
Again,
Republican ideas, everything he's
read
done.
the Woodward book. The Woodward book is very clear about how Plouffe, and Axelrod directed a policy that was political, and they wanted a victory. I think he's shown that he has a hard time dealing with the Republicans, and we know from the percentage of votes that the Republicans in the Senate are more bipartisan than Democrats in the Senate. Republicans in the House are more partisan than Democrats in the House. Statistically.
No. Mitch McConnell, what is my #1 goal? This president is a one-term president. We will defeat this president. Right, whatever.
And he said, and Mitch McConnell said after that, he said, my goal is to change his policy so he'll have a successful presidency. He didn't. Again, I'd read the Woodward book on this, if you don't believe me.
Bob Woodward is not the last word on anything, but you are giving us a selective reading of the Woodward book.
I agree, but he takes the quote that you're referring to and get the next couple of lines from that, because the next couple of lines heavily qualify what you've just said. So I would read that book.
Well, the Republicans have used the filibuster, I think something like 80 times this year. It used to be, a handful of times. And they vote against things they even support. I do believe, as the president says, if he is reelected, quote, the fever will break, because I think there probably are half a dozen or 8 Republicans in the Senate who are uncomfortable with the constantly voting no. But I disagree that a majority of Senate Republicans are bipartisan, because the Tea Party fever has really taken over there.
It's statistically true that the Republicans in the Senate vote on a little bit more bipartisan basis than Democrats in the Senate. It's statistically true that Republicans in the House vote a little bit less bipartisan. And my point about that
a little bit less. The House Republicans don't want to pass anything. They don't even want Democratic votes. They only want to pass things with a majority of their own caucus. That's their policy.
Rahm Emanuel is quoted in the Woodward book, and I think you've seen this elsewhere, in 2009, and I'm not going to use the exact word he used, but when discussing Obamacare, and then further again when discussing the stimulus bill, he said, we've got the votes, screw them. That's my lighter version of what he actually said. I have to disagree with you about this.
Well,
it's clear that
I think we don't want to pound this into the ground, but there's also a scene of Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican, sitting in the Oval Office, and Obama saying, can we count on your vote? And he's saying, no, I won't vote for it unless I can get like 6 or 7 other Republicans to go with me. And they vested so much time in Chuck Grassley and his, bipartisanship anyway. So I think.
Okay, we'll agree to disagree.
I think you
I
have
think
a selective reading of the Woodward book.
No,
I have my anecdotes from the Woodward book, and you have yours. We each have our own polls.
All right. Okay.
We each have our own bottle of water. Right? And who gets that one?
You're faster than I am.
Right.
Faster than
Actually, no, you're ahead of me.
Okay. Now,
Right.
I've got 2 more things that I want to ask. One is along the lines. I want to get to at the end. I want a more positive. I want to sing "Kumbaya" at the end.
Okay.
But Arthur Brisbane, who's a person that a number of people in the audience will know, because he spent a lot of time in Kansas City. He was a columnist and then the editor and then the publisher of the Kansas City Star. Went out and worked at Knight Ridder for a while, but his last job, which he just resigned from, or he just finished, was as the public editor of the New York Times. And he wrote a farewell column 2 Sundays or 3 Sundays ago, something like that. And in his column, and Art is a good friend of mine, and I don't think he'd mind my saying this, he's a card-carrying liberal. I mean, he's a progressive, as we say today. But he said about the Times, and it wasn't the only thing he said, and he had a lot of good things to say about the Times, so I want to be honest about that. But he said there was a hive progressive mentality, and the coverage of certain national issues, particularly cultural issues. He talked specifically about Occupy Wall Street and gay marriage. He said that the Times has no ability to see its own shadow, to understand what its own biases. Isn't there a basic liberal bias in the media that affects our view of President Obama, Mitt Romney?
Yeah, I think that's so overstated. I mean, his conservative bias in plenty of places
Fox
as
News, sure,
well.
I would agree with you about that.
Now, on the cultural things,
Hardly
I would
fair
agree
and
that
balanced,
the New York Times, the major media in Washington and New York, they're probably more pro-choice than not. They're probably more in favor of gun control than they are certainly here in the Midwest. So I think there are some cultural issues that separate them. But when I look at the issue of gay marriage, I mean, I think the transformation in this country, or what President Obama would call the evolution, has been truly stunning. And it's not just in, liberal hives in New York or Washington. It's throughout the country. So I really think it's such an old argument. Whenever the conservatives start to lose, they start screaming, media bias. I've heard in the last couple of days so much about how the media has really been protecting Obama, and they've been so hard on Romney. And I just think that's
Yeah, I don't
nonsense.
think it's been particularly hard on Romney. I'd probably agree with you about that. He's been hard on himself.
Yeah, that's right.
but-
yeah.
But when you look at certain issues like Fast and Furious, where we have this week their own internal investigation, 12 people have been censured inside the Justice Department, and you couldn't find it in the New York Times except on page 28.
I heard it all. It was a report that exonerated Holder, who knew nothing about this, ordered the investigation.
Yeah, but it didn't exonerate.
It began in the previous
12
administration.
people were censured inside the Justice Department. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, no, it was a mess, but it wasn't ordered from the top by Eric Holder, which is how the Republicans overreached on that.
Well, let's end on this. Let me ask you, what do you think of the slogans of the president and his opponent in the campaign?
I'm not sure what Romney's slogan is, to be honest.
No, that's what I would say. I have no idea. The president's slogan, of course, after
forward.
Hope and Change, is now forward.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of silly.
It's kind of silly, but you can remember it.
But you can remember it.
Right.
And I want to say, the guy I'm probably going to end up voting for, who knows?
Right, that's his problem.
Yeah.
Is,
Okay.
he hasn't defined himself as a human being or as a potential president.
Okay. Well, I think that's something
Right.
we can
Okay, we
absolutely
agree
on
on
that. Okay. And now, if I may, first of all, will you all thank Eleanor Clift for
And thank Crosby too, because he he manages to be perfectly charming even when he's saying the most
That's so
ridiculous
wrong,
things. Okay.
Isn't she great? We'll take some questions from the audience now. I think Henry explained to you before we'd like very short questions. Ms. Clift has got to get out of here pretty quickly to go and advise the president on his slogans. So short questions, and we'll take just a few of them. Yes, sir.
I want to say I watch the McLaughlin Group. It's my favorite program, and I appreciate the way you stick up for the liberal side, even when the guys gang up on you. But the question is, this thing that Senate Leader McConnell has said, that, we're not going to let anything through. I'm a practicing politician, and I appreciate good old-fashioned bare-knuckle politics, but I thought the idea was that when the good of the nation is at stake, we lay our partisanship aside. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, he asked for a comment. We'll go with it.
Right. I think Obama actually was surprised that he thought he would get more cooperation initially, that the country was in the worst financial situation since the Great Depression. And if you look at the period of time when President Bush was still in office, and you had the Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, going to Capitol Hill and saying, the whole thing's going down the tubes, got to vote quick. And Republicans basically held their noses in support of that. President Bush did a lot of things he didn't want to do. And I think Obama thought that that same spirit would carry forward into the Congress in those first months. And it quickly became apparent that that was not going to happen, but I think it took him really it took him, I think, until the debt crisis a little over a year ago to understand that he was not going to get any cooperation.
Here, sir.
How much a role does quantitative analysis play in the choice and planning of the strategies for the presidential campaigns now?
Oh, I think both campaigns, they study the electorate, they target it, they break it down into minuscule portions, and because the number of undecideds in this election are so relatively small, this is what they call an election of mobilization. Each side has to get their voters out, and they don't want to waste a lot of time appealing to voters that they have no chance with. And I think a lot of this is done scientifically through social media and very sophisticated methods on both sides, although I suspect the Obama people are a little ahead in this simply because they seem to understand the internet and social media more than the Romney crowd. But both sides are doing it, and they need to do it. That's modern politics.
4 years ago, the college students were really working, it seemed to me, particularly for Obama, but they were more a scene that you could identify. And I haven't noticed that so much this year. Would you comment on that? I mean, I know my grandson, who was a freshman in college, went to Iowa to work on the caucuses just because he was so enthused, and I'm not seeing that this time around.
Well, 4 years ago, the Democratic pollster Peter Hart says 4 years ago it was a crusade. Mm-hmm. Now it's just another election. And young people, are notoriously fickle when it comes to voting, and that's one of the Obama campaign's challenges. Is to, one of the reasons they won in 2008 is they got a higher than usual turnout among young people and minorities, and they lost the House and lost 6 Senate seats in 2010 because it was a much smaller electorate, older and whiter, that turned out, and a lot of those college kids stayed home. And so you're right, you don't really see them out there, and you're going to see Obama on the campaign trail. He's done a college tour. He's going to do more. He's been out there touting his better deals on college loans, trying to get them interested. But no, it's a challenge. And I must say, I have 3 grown sons, and I've always said to them, you can do a lot that I don't like, and you can still come home and I'll love you, but if you don't vote, you're in big trouble. I mean, I try to convey to people it's a ticket of admission to a democratic society, and in other cultures, they'll crawl over broken glass for the right to vote. I mean, we really shouldn't treat it so cavalierly.
No, you came to the right place. In Missouri, we vote early and often.
Okay, all right. Except Missouri, I'm not sure. Okay.
How do you rate the likelihood that this election will mark the end of the conservative arc going back to the mid-70s?
That's a question that's music to my ears, although when Obama was elected in 2008, that's what I thought, and I was quickly disabused of it by the fall of 2009 when the Tea Party arose, and we had this real argument about the role of government emerge. But I do think it's at the heart of this election, and if Obama does win, and if he does win convincingly, he does set back the conservatism to some extent. And I think you could argue that the Tea Party is in tatters. They've probably lost the chance for the Republicans to regain control of the Senate. And they've just gone too far. I mean, this is essentially a middle-of-the-road country. Center right, center left, not center far right. And so I think we're going to see a correction to the correction of 2010.
Thank you, Ms. Cliff. When you said we should shift resources from fighting terrorism to fighting voter fraud, did you really mean that?
No,
The
that
other way
was
around. The other way.
no. I was making fun
Right,
that
she's making
fraud.
fun of me.
That's right.
I'm
that
saying
fraud-
that's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
No, that fraud is such a big issue. We should forget terrorism and shift it to fighting fraud. I was being sarcastic. No, I did not mean it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. See, now that's if I were running for office, what a 30-second ad you could get out of that. Eleanor favors the Al-Qaeda voting.
Right, yeah.
It's an honor. I have followed you since you're on Washington Week, and I have a political journalism question for you. We've seen the rise of these freelance fact-check websites, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and others. And to me, that's the campaigns don't really seem to be fazed by these. In fact, the Romney pollster, one of them, made a very dismissive comment about these fact-check organizations. Shouldn't this inspire reporters, not pundits, but reporters at mainstream news organizations like Newsweek, the New York Times, to actually challenge the candidates on their use of facts instead of just saying, he said this and he...
Yeah, I think you're onto something. One of the reasons I think Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert are so popular, especially with young people, is that they get to the heart of the truth and they don't practice sometimes this artificial fairness. Well, he said this and he said that, and there's no judgment made. But I think on political ads, if you live in a swing state, as maybe you do here, maybe you get a lot of these ads, that the people view them sort of overall as sort of advertising and bogus, and so voters don't know what to make of them, and they don't really hold them, I think, to absolute levels of truth. And the Romney campaign has just ignored they've doubled down on this welfare ad accusing Obama of undermining welfare reform, despite all the fact checkers saying that it's wrong. Now
I would
ad.
say if you want, it is true that I can't remember if it's PolitiFact or factcheck.org went after the Romney folks about the welfare thing, but it's also true that Mickey Kaus, whom you may know,
I know Mickey.
Mickey Kaus,
He's a world-class contrarian.
He's a world-class contrarian. He's also I don't know exactly what to call him, but he's a
Smart guy.
He's a pragmatic liberal and a smart guy. And he's written at length in his blog, which is one of the most fascinating political blogs, the Kaus Files, about this issue, pointing out the actual sequence of events where the Kathleen Sebelius is coming out and saying, well, you've got to increase your, the people who go to work on the welfare reform by 20%, but she does that after the initial criticisms, et cetera. And Kaus's point is that actually the Romney ad is right if you look at what was originally proposed by Kathleen Sebelius.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that ad, though, is going to people's biases and preconceptions that somehow Obama
Shocking.
wants to let people get welfare checks without working, when in fact it's hard enough to get fully able-bodied college graduates a job in this economy, let alone moving people from welfare to work. And all this administration was doing was trying to let governors, Republican governors, requesting waivers that they could find other ways to make these people productive. And to turn that into a political football, it seems to me is really lowball. So.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
But
there's a long history of debate between liberals and conservatives about the work requirements in the welfare reform. And this seemed to a lot of people, including some people in the center and the left, as sneaking it in through new rules.
Yeah, right. I don't think so. Clinton signed it a lot of years ago. It's in place. I don't think they're sneaking anything. But thank you for going all the way back to Washington Week. That is such a nice civilized program, unlike the McLaughlin Group. Yeah. On Washington Week, everybody gets there like 6 minutes, and before time, they ask each other what questions they'd like to be asked, just like we did back there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Paul.
I want to thank you both. You did a great job, and I love the comment that we each have our own bottle of water.
Right.
I have two very quick questions. Nat Silver, was it 538.com, blog on the New York Times, he talks about how all polls aren't equal and like Gallup, for example, doesn't poll people with cell phones. My first question is, how important is the fact that some of the polls leave out cell phone users? My second quick question is, we hear a lot in the media about the importance of a debate. Their name escapes me, but two political scientists put a book together and they analyzed the history of debates and what impact they had, and they concluded the impact of a debate is really pretty marginal. Any reaction to that?
Well, first on that Silver and Real Clear Politics, they generally average out all the polls, and so I think that's a good way to approach it. But it's important to know the samples, and a lot of people today, young people in particular, do not have landlines. They only operate with cell phones. But I think Gallup kind of waits for that. So I think Gallup is still respected, and I would put them in the mix with the average. As far as the debates, I would respectfully disagree. I mean, I think the Reagan-Carter debate, the Carter was basically slightly ahead despite a miserable economy and hostages in Iran, and the bottom fell out when Reagan was so genial in that campaign. He didn't seem like he would cause a war or anything like people were accusing him. So I think that was decisive. Kennedy-Nixon, we all know about that. You know, the Kennedy looked so great, Nixon looked sick. If you watched it on TV, Kennedy won. If you listened on the radio, Nixon won. I think that was decisive. And I think George W. Bush versus Al Gore. And Al Gore was, they said it was the Goldilocks strategy. He was too timid in the first one, then he was too hot in the second one, and then he was just right in the third one, except he ventured into President Bush's space at one point.
At him.
Yeah, and then the cameras caught him, you know, sighing and rolling his eyes, and so, you know, Jack Germond, who was one of the original members of the McLaughlin Group, I talked to him some weeks ago, and he seemed to sum things up for me pretty well. He said, people don't like Romney, and if you're going to unseat an incumbent, people have to be comfortable with you. And so he kind of dismissed him just on that comfort level. And I think Gore lost largely on that. So, I mean, I think these debates, certainly the Romney campaign, it's their kind of their last hope that somehow this standout winning performance, or maybe Obama will make some serious gaffe, although Romney is pretty gaffe prone too. And unfortunately, that's what we look for in these debates. Is there some sort of, like Gerald Ford with declaring Poland free when it was under domination? That helped Jimmy Carter win that race. So I'm sure maybe you can come up with some statistical analysis, or maybe use some of Crosby's polls and find out that the debates don't matter.
Got 1 million of them.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier tonight, if you live in New York or California or Texas, the campaigns aren't paying any attention to you because you're not in a swing state, and that, of course, is because of the Electoral College, which I think is an outdated institution. It makes all the votes not even. Do you ever foresee that going away? Could it ever go away?
I think you could probably go online and find a group to sign up with that's lobbying to make it go away, but nobody's come up with an alternative except to have everybody just mass vote, and somehow that makes people nervous. That really might leave too much room for hanky-panky, I don't know. And we do have these differences among states, and the founding fathers sort of wrote it into the Constitution that the smaller the state you are and the fewer population you have, somehow the more power you should have, and we haven't figured out a way to get around that. I'd be open to other ideas, and I'm sure there's some intellectual ferment out there, but I would not hold my breath waiting for the Electoral College to change or go away.
It seems so unfair.
Well, I have, after reading Eleanor's book, where she's got the list of all the electoral votes and whatnot, and I did a little calculation about how it might come out exactly even. You know, it's an even number, so you could actually have a tie in the Electoral College, and in fact we did in 1800 have a tie between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson, which kicks it into the House of Representatives. And so I have this theory, or this idea that maybe we have a tie this time because it's so close in the polls, and it kicked in the House of Representatives, and they picked Paul Ryan. That might get some people to advocate for changing
That might even get me to vote for Mitt Romney. The lesser of two evils. All right.
Sir.
Good evening, Ms. Clift. I'm a science teacher here in Kansas City, and I've noticed recently, especially with the strikes in Chicago, that the view of educators and the view of education have come in a more negative light. Now, given the quote-unquote decline in American education, why does educational policy not play a more important role in presidential politics when education plays a role in every American life?
That's a very good question, and I noticed NBC at MSNBC, or they keep trying to champion it as an issue, and I think President Obama either has or will be declaring that if reelected, Arne Duncan stays on as Secretary of Education. He's actually widely respected in both parties, and I saw a discussion on Morning Joe this morning where they were advocating the candidates talk about education in the framework of national security, because if we need to turn out people who can compete in the world, and it has to do with our economic health and also with our place in the world. So I think education has to be talked about in more broader terms than are you in favor of charter schools or not. And then the testing issue, though, is so emotional. And one of the reasons that parents actually, majority of parents backed the strike in Chicago is because the schools have really turned into factories for testing. And they've taken out all, art and music and PE, and so now they're left with, test taking. And Rahm Emanuel, the mayor, did win the longer school day. I think that's all good. And the teachers won some concessions, but our public schools, particularly in the urban areas, do need some modernizing. One of the issues in Chicago is air conditioning. It gets really hot, and some of these buildings go back to the 1940s. So I know there's an objection to spend public money on public education, but that's what we need to do. And George W. Bush actually was in the forefront on these issues. He was very progressive, to use that word, on education. And so George W. Bush on education and immigration could find common ground with Democrats.
This is a question for you both, and maybe I think one of the factors in high unemployment is that there's so much outsourcing by American corporations. And is there some way, I know they have to do this maybe for competition, but is there some way that they would not object to higher taxes because they have taken jobs away from Americans? Or maybe there could be some law that would compensate?
I think President Obama actually has some proposal that he's pushing so that you get rewarded if you bring his jobs back, or you don't get rewarded if you ship them out. But that is an issue, and I think Obama has actually made some progress in sort of getting some manufacturing back on its feet in this country. But corporations are there. They're designed to make money, and you're right, outsourcing is often cheaper, and so we have to, through our tax code and through our working conditions, make it more attractive for people to have jobs here. And actually in China, they're beginning to face as they get more modernized, they're beginning to face some problems with their workforces, and you have some factories coming back from China and relocating here because our workforce is more favorable.
And it's happened with Japan. You may remember, it was originally outsourcing, we were buying more products that had been made in America from the Japanese. Japanese steel, for instance, was a huge political issue in the 70s. And what country makes more steel today than Japan? The United States makes lots more steel than Japan. Japan functionally doesn't make steel anymore because they've offshored it elsewhere. But there's a myth about outsourcing and offshoring, which are two slightly different things, but essentially the same thing. You go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they've got a whole section on this. And what that section will tell you is that since 1980, we've actually received more jobs from foreign companies locating here. Think of the car plants in Tennessee and South Carolina and Alabama. than jobs that we've sent abroad. There's a net inflow of jobs to the United States from foreign companies since 1980. Before 1980, no, we outsourced. So net over the, since they've been keeping these statistics, we're still modestly negative. But since 1980, we're actually positive.
That's interesting.
Eleanor, I'm sure you don't mind me calling you that because
No.
you've been in my house 100
Okay,
times.
thank you.
Friday night and also sometimes on Sunday. And,
All right.
and obviously this is definitely your house tonight. But you said something about 5 weeks ago on your program that Obama is leading with the Catholic Church or the Catholic religion by about 8%. Was that a number that you and I must go to a different Catholic church?
Okay.
Do you have something to substantiate that, or?
Catholics basically vote like everybody else. They're not this really distinct other group. And I think John McLaughlin was trying to make the point that Obama was behind with Catholics, but I think I found a poll that had him, with an 8-point increase, which would not surprise me since he's doing well with many different populations.
Well, one other thing, just real quick. They both stink. I mean, they both stink. They both got a lot of baggage, and I wish they didn't have. I wish I was prouder of what's going on. And I was really excited for our president when he got.
Okay. Now, Verlin, I believe I said questions, no political statements.
Okay, no,
no, I really did. And we only have time for 4 more questions. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Or actually, 1, 2, 3, 4. Verlin, you've had your time. And I got to go because I got to catch a bus to Cupcake County. So,
Okay.
so Eleanor, thanks very much.
All right.
And Crosby, I'm leaving it in your hands. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Stock market is falling. Okay, Sharon.
Thank you, Mr. Fortunato, for your commercial. Ms. Clift, I'm a huge fan. Have been all my law school days and also in my legal career. So I look to your analysis. And the question is, language is a big part in campaigns. I wonder what you think of language such as Obamacare and Take Back My Country. To me, it's very inflammatory. It incites people, passions on one way or the other. So what do you think about that? Particularly Take Back My Country, where?
Right, I understand Take Back My Country is offensive to some people. And, I guess it means take it back from the socialist government that's in place in Washington, and that's the general idea. But Obamacare, the president is now embracing it. He's saying, okay, maybe they mean it as an insult, but I do care. And I think he's used the phrase Romney care. So I think some of the emotion has been drained from that particular word, which is good. And I would just ignore the other phrase if it bothers you. Turn off the TV.
Sure.
I had a short vacation in Canada, pretty much ruined by a Republican threat to not raise the debt ceiling so that we couldn't pay our just debts. I just feel like if you're going to ask me to not accept the entitlement of the retirement that I worked for 43 years for, or you're going to ask me to give up part of the retirement that just being a normal senior, or Medicare, or Medicaid. If you're going to attack entitlements, I just want to say, for me, I'm not apologetic about my entitlements. I am entitled to those things. I earned them.
Is there a question there?
Question is, do you see something coming in terms of relating how we're going to settle the debt problem without trying to take it all off of the expense side?
They're going to come together. You can't do it without raising taxes. And again, I think that you're going to have some Republicans, if they lose this chance to get the White House back and to gain the control of the Senate, which they in an election where they should have won in an economy this bad, there are going to be all kinds of recriminations, and I think you're going to have some Republicans who are going to be willing to work with the White House. And the Simpson-Bowles Commission report, which advocates tax revenue, spending cuts, is the model, and you can't control the deficit without raising taxes and do it as the Republicans claim you can by cutting taxes instead. And I do think reality will intervene after the election. But the growth in the entitlements will have to be slowed, but it doesn't have to be done, drastically, dramatically. Social Security is the easiest. You could just raise the cap on the income that it's deducted from. And Medicare, Obamacare is putting in place some programs. We're going to have to shift eventually from this fee-for-service to more what they call outcomes-based care. So, but that's not going to be done overnight. But I think the president says the deficit is a problem, but it's not a short-term problem. It's a medium and long-term problem.
But it is a problem where you're going to have to deal with the growth of entitlements, and particularly the growth of Medicare. I mean, Medicare and Medicaid together will be 62% of the budget in 20 years. So we have to deal with it. And the president would agree with that. It's a question of how you get there.
Right, exactly.
Yes, I know you're a national figure, but I'd like to ask you a question about our state, Missouri. Do you think Missouri is transforming itself from a Midwestern state, politically and culturally, to a Southern state?
Do I think
Do you
what?
think Missouri is transforming itself from a Midwestern state to a Southern state? I think you're talking about things like Todd Aiken being mayoral candidate.
I see.
And if so, why?
I think Todd Aiken is a bit of an anomaly. I mean, and I think the backlash to him, I mean, if he loses the Senate race, that's kind of a pretty firm rejection.
You got favorable comment from Claire McCaskill throughout the latter part of the primary campaign because she wanted him to be her opponent.
Right. But, conservative forces or, religious right, whatever term you want to use, have certainly grown here in recent years. But, I mean, you did elect McCaskill. She may well win. So, I mean, I don't think the state is firmly, red again or Southern, right? It's still between red and purple.
I think one thing to remember is Governor Nixon is going to win re-election by a very large vote. I mean, he may win.
Conservative for a Democrat, isn't he?
He's too conservative for you?
I didn't say he's quite conservative.
He's liberal enough for the trial lawyers, but at a national level, I think you'd find he's fairly liberal. I'm not sure what you're referring to. He had to cut the budget because he had to cut the budget.
Oh, sure.
Obama only lost by 3,000 votes. Right. It was a very, very close election.
Right.
I think we have become more conservative as somebody who's been involved in this for a long, long time. And from my point of view, that's on the whole a good thing. But I think we're very much still a 50-50 state.
Still a purple state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last question.
Yes, an issue that might have been overlooked in the political campaign, I think, is racism. When you have the McConnells, the Cantors, the white male American voters so desperately wanting Obama to be a failed president, is it simply not based also on the fact that they can't reconcile themselves to the fact that a black man is president?
Well, I think I said earlier that no Democrat has won the white vote in this country since Lyndon Johnson. And the Republicans, because they have not done well with minorities and really, and women even, are more reliant on the white male working class vote, what we used to call Reagan Democrats. They were Democrats, they went over to Reagan. And I think they are the most compromised in this economy. They have the hardest time when many are high school diplomas. They don't have college. They have trades. They lose their jobs. They don't go into training. They're mad as hell and they don't want to take it anymore. And they blame it on Obama. They're a shrinking portion of the electorate, but there is definitely, there's it's not just the color of his skin. I think it's a whole cultural thing, that the world around them is changing. They don't recognize America. So, and I think one of the reasons Joe Biden is on the ticket, because he comes from working class roots and he kind of gets what these people are and this portion of the population is experiencing. And while they're a shrinking portion of the overall electorate, they're still pretty significant in Ohio and Pennsylvania. It's one of the reasons West Virginia, which used to be a solidly Democratic state, in the primary, Obama lost to some guy who's actually in prison somewhere. I mean, there was that much hatred for him.
The New Yorker wrote a really interesting article about a part of Ohio that's southern, very southern, near the Ohio River, near Kentucky, during the last campaign, in which I forget who the reporter was, but he found a lot of people who were clearly racist and used words that we won't use here in this family library about then Senator Obama in an area that he carried very, very heavily, and these people said they were going to vote for him. They were going to vote for him for other reasons. I think there's clearly still racism in this country, but I'm not sure it trumps other issues for most people. And I think, I think a good example of that is where we are right now. The 5th Congressional District, Kansas City, is substantially white. It's 70-something% white, and there are plenty of rednecks wandering around this district. And Emanuel Cleaver, the chairman of the Black Caucus in the United States Congress, is our representative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's what have you done to me lately?
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Eleanor Clift for a wonderful conversation.
All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, that worked out. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay.